He stared at the judge, fingers trembling as he clutched the deed to the only home he had ever owned. He knew his daughter didn't know. Not yet. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead, and his vision blurred, but he could make out Genevieve's face in the back of the courtroom, a smug, hard glint in her eyes. He couldn't hear the judge's voice over the pounding in his chest. All he could feel was the weight of that one fateful piece of paper. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about everything he had ever built, everything he had ever lost. It was about a life that had shattered in a single moment, a life he had to somehow put back together. Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening to from? The morning sun used to feel like an old friend, cutting through the dusty windows of Lyle's Hardware and Hobbies on Elm Street. Every morning for 36 years I had unlocked that door, the chime above it a familiar, comforting sound, a simple song in the quiet Rust Belt town of Almeria. The bell was chipped, the wood frame around it scarred with 1,000 tiny nicks, each one a memory of a customer, a child, a life. My wife Genevieve would be at home still, probably nursing a cup of coffee and looking at her tablet the same way she had for the last few years. Our routine was as predictable as the tide. I'd open the shop, she'd have her coffee, and we'd meet for lunch at that little diner down by the creek. It was a good life, a simple life, or so I had always told myself, but for the past year or so, a shadow had been growing between us, a silent, creeping chill that I could feel even in the warmth of our small, shared moments. She was different now, the woman who once laughed easily and shared my passion for the little things, for the smell of sawdust and the feel of a freshly planed piece of pine, was gone. In her place was a stranger, obsessed with the digital world and the endless stream of perfect lives she saw on her screen. She'd sigh when I talked about the shop, about the satisfaction of fixing something with my own hands, about the old men who would come in just to talk about fishing lures or the best way to get a hinge to stop squeaking. Her sighs were quiet, almost imperceptible, but they were there, and each one felt like a small crack appearing in the foundation of our world. I knew she had dreams I couldn't understand, and maybe never would. She talked about a different kind of life, a life of travel and new experiences, of things that were beyond the small reach of my small, humble existence. I tried to bridge the gap, to show her that our life was enough, that our love was the only adventure we needed, but my words felt hollow, lost in the chasm of her growing discontent. She just wanted something more, something I couldn't give her, something that only money could buy. That thought was a persistent and ugly little knot in my stomach, a knot that I could feel tightening with every passing day. It all felt so slow, so gradual. One moment, we were laughing about a silly television show. The next, she was scrolling through a different world, her face lit by the cold, unforgiving light of a tablet screen. She bought a lottery ticket a few weeks ago, something she had never done before, a wild, spontaneous gesture that felt out of place. It was a one-off thing, she said, a little bit of fun, a dream in a foil wrapper. I had forgotten all about it. I was busy with the shop, with the never-ending list of repairs and customer requests. The thought of winning big was a joke to me, a fantasy for the young and the foolish. I believed in hard work, in the quiet, honest grind of a life earned, not one. I believed in the value of a dollar you had to sweat for, not one that simply appeared out of thin air. It was a principle I had lived by my entire life, one that had defined me, and one that she had once shared. But watching her now, staring at her screen, I knew that our shared beliefs were fading, leaving us to stand on two different shores, watching the same sunrise, but seeing two completely different worlds. I was in the back room, sorting through a fresh shipment of nuts and bolts, the clatter of metal against metal, a familiar rhythm. The bell on the front door chimed. I called out, "Be right there," and finished stacking a pile of washers, my fingers a little greasy but content. When I walked out, it wasn't a customer. It was Genevieve, standing in the middle of the shop, her face an unreadable mask of disbelief and shock. In her hand she held the lottery ticket, the little piece of paper that I had forgotten all about. She didn't say a word, just stared at it, her mouth slightly agape, her knuckles white as she held it. My own heart started to pound. I had seen that look before, but never on her face. It was the kind of look you saw on people when they came face to face with the impossible, with a reality so strange and magnificent it couldn't possibly be true. I walked slowly toward her, wiping my hands on a rag, a strange sense of dread starting to creep up my spine. "Genevieve," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, glassy with a mixture of fear and wonder. She didn't speak, just held the ticket out to me. I took it, my own hand shaking a little now, and read the numbers. They were the same. a line of numbers that meant nothing, and yet meant everything. I looked at her, then back at the ticket. The prize was staggering, more money than I could ever imagine. It was an amount that didn't make sense, a number so large it felt like a joke. We just stood there for a long moment, the silence of the shop broken only by the whir of the old ceiling fan above us, the dust motes dancing in the light. This was it. The solution to all our financial troubles, the answer to her longing for something more. This was the moment that would change everything. A moment that should have brought us closer, but instead it felt like it was pushing us apart. The first thing she said wasn't a cry of joy or a shout of relief. It was a question, sharp and cold. "We're not telling anyone about this. Not a soul. Not even Raina." I was stunned. I looked at her, confused. Why wouldn't we tell our daughter, our only child? Why keep such a massive piece of good news to ourselves? But she was adamant. It was a secret, she insisted, just between us. The way she said it, the way she clutched my arm and stared into my eyes, it felt less like a promise and more like a threat. She said we needed to be smart, to be careful. She was already talking about lawyers, about financial advisors, about a life that was so far removed from the one we had built together, the one that smelled of sawdust and old paper. The change in her was immediate and unsettling. The quiet contentment I had known her to have was gone, replaced by a frenetic, almost manic energy. She was already mentally spending the money, already planning a new life, a new beginning, a new us. But as I stood there, looking at the same woman I had loved for 30 years, I knew that the us she was talking about was already gone. Over the next few days, the shop felt colder, a tomb of my own making. The bells still chimed, the customers still came and went, but the familiar rhythm was off-key, the song of my life now a discordant jangle. Genevieve was almost never home. She would leave early in the morning, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, and she'd come back late, her face flushed with a strange sort of exhilaration I couldn't place. She was always on her phone, always whispering into it, her voice hushed and secretive. I tried to talk to her, to ask her about what was happening, but she'd wave me off, saying it was business, that there were things I wouldn't understand. She started using a different phone, a new one, a burner phone, she called it. The casual way she said it, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, sent a shiver down my spine. The truth was, she was a stranger in my own home, a phantom moving through the hallways and the rooms, a ghost I could no longer reach. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of our life, but the pieces no longer fit. The woman I knew was gone, and I had no idea how to get her back. I started seeing a car I didn't recognize parked on our street, a black sedan with tinted windows. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of a man getting out of it, a man in an expensive suit, a briefcase in his hand. One day I was sitting on the porch swing, sipping a cup of coffee, when I saw Genevieve get out of the car. She was laughing, a bright, clear sound that I hadn't heard in years. She looked happy, truly happy, in a way she hadn't been with me. And that hurt. That stung in a way the silence and the secrecy never could. I knew then that this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about something else, something I couldn't understand, something that was pushing her further and further away from me. I confronted her that evening, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Who is that man, Genevieve? What is going on?" She looked at me, her face hardening into a cold, unfamiliar mask. "It's my lawyer," she said, her voice flat. "His name is Oswin, and he's helping me with my inheritance." The way she said the word inheritance, as if the lottery winnings were a birthright, something she had always been entitled to, was a dagger to the heart. It was then that I knew something was terribly wrong, something more than just her sudden wealth. The following morning a registered letter arrived in the mail. I signed for it, my hands still shaking a little from the previous night's confrontation. I walked into the kitchen, the envelope in my hand. Genevieve was sitting at the table, her tablet in front of her, a smirk on her face. "Don't open it, Lyle," she said, her voice a low, warning hiss. "It's for me," but I was done with her secrets, with her lies. I tore open the envelope, my heart pounding in my ears, and unfolded the document inside. It was a legal document, a formal notice. I started to read it, but the words swam before my eyes. My hands started to shake, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. The paper was covered in legal jargon, but one phrase stood out, stark and unforgiving. It was a request for divorce, filed by her, with a restraining order attached that barred me from accessing any of our joint accounts. The finality of the words on the page was a crushing blow, and I couldn't believe this was happening. The paper fluttered from my trembling hand and landed on the kitchen table with a sickening rustle. Genevieve watched it fall, her smirk a little wider now, a cold, triumphant smile that I had never seen on her face before. I couldn't speak. The air felt thick, impossible to breathe. The words on the page had stripped the oxygen from the room, from my lungs. Divorce. She had filed for divorce. Just like that. After 30 years, after a lifetime of shared meals, shared laughter, and shared dreams, she had simply thrown it all away for a piece of paper and a list of numbers. My mind was reeling, trying to catch up with the sudden brutal reality of it all. I looked at her, my eyes pleading, searching for a trace of the woman I had loved, the one who used to trace patterns on my calloused hands, but she was gone. Her eyes were as hard as glass, her face as unforgiving as stone. She was a stranger, a beautiful, cruel stranger who had just ripped my life in two. What is this, Genevieve? I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracking. She didn't answer. She simply stood up, walked to the counter, and picked up a briefcase, the same one the lawyer, Oswin, had been carrying. She unzipped it and pulled out a stack of papers, legal documents. It's a divorce, she said, her voice emotionless. The ticket was mine, Lyle. I bought it with my own money, with my own hands. I'm the sole owner of the winnings. The judge agreed with me. You're not entitled to a single penny of it. The words hit me like a physical blow. A lie. It was a bold, brazen lie. We had bought the ticket together, with money from our joint account, from the small shared savings we had accumulated over a lifetime. It was our money, our dream, a foolish shared fantasy that had now turned into a nightmare. But we bought it together, I said, the words feeling foreign and ridiculous on my tongue. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Did we, or did you just happen to be there when I was feeling lucky? She laid the papers on the table, a stack of legal documents that outlined a life I no longer recognized. An eviction notice, that was the next one. An eviction notice for our home, the house we had bought together, the one where we had raised our daughter. She was kicking me out of my own home, the one I had paid for with the sweat of my brow and the toil of my hands. My mind reeled. It was all a blur, the cold, hard words on the page. She was a master, a virtuoso of cruelty. She had plotted all of this, planned it all out right under my nose, while I was busy with my rusty nails and my squeaky hinges. While I was busy living the life we had built together, she was building a new one without me, a life of wealth and opulence, a life she intended to live alone. The final page was a list of assets, a cruel, mocking inventory of everything we had accumulated over a lifetime, all of which she now claimed as her own. The shop was not on the list. It was mine, she said, my last remaining possession, the only thing she didn't want. The irony of it was a bitter, stinging slap to the face. She wanted everything else, but she didn't want the one thing that was the heart and soul of my existence. You can have the shop, she said, a sneer on her lips. I don't want it. It's a relic of a life I'm leaving behind. She didn't mention the $78 million. She didn't have to. The number hung in the air, a silent, mocking presence, a testament to her greed, her cruelty, and my utter, complete loss. I stood on the curb, the sun setting behind a row of crooked houses. In my hand, I clutched a small bag, the only possessions I had managed to grab. I didn't even have a key to the house anymore. She had changed the locks. I was a ghost now, haunting a life I no longer belonged to, a man without a home, a man without a wife, a man without a future. My truck felt impossibly small, a tiny metal box that was now the only home I had. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, and just stared at the house, the porch light glowing in the twilight, a warm, inviting beacon that was no longer meant for me. It was an alien world now, a place I had once called home, a place that now felt as distant and cold as a star. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the shutters newly painted, the front door an inviting shade of blue. It was a perfect picture of a happy home, a perfect, brutal lie that was now my reality. I started the engine, the familiar rumble of the truck a sad, lonely song. I had to go. I had to leave this place that held so many memories, so much love, so much pain. My first thought was to go to Raina's house, to see my daughter, to tell her what had happened. But my hands trembled as I reached for my phone. What would I say? How do you tell your child that her mother has thrown you out, that she has taken everything you ever had, everything you had ever built? How do you explain that your life has been reduced to a handful of clothes and a beat-up old truck? The words felt impossible to say. a burden too heavy to place on her young shoulders. I knew Raina was struggling with her own things, with a new job in a new city, and I didn't want to add my burden to hers. So I didn't call. I couldn't. The fear of her reaction, of her disappointment, was too much to bear. So I just drove, aimlessly, down the dark, lonely back roads of Almeria, the quiet streets and familiar landmarks, a testament to a life that was now lost to me forever. I drove past the diner, the one where we had had so many lunches, the one where we had sat in comfortable silence, sharing a plate of fries and a lifetime of love. It was a painful, brutal reminder of what had been and what would never be again. I ended up at the shop. My shop. The one place that was still mine, the one place that hadn't been touched by her greed, by her cruelty. I sat in the truck in the dark, staring at the front door, the faded sign with my name on it, Lyle's Hardware and Hobbies. It felt like a monument to a life that had passed, a tribute to a man who no longer existed. This was my legacy, my life's work, and it was all I had left. The thought of it was both a comfort and a curse. It was a reminder of everything I had built, but also a reminder of everything I had lost. I could see the ghost of myself in the window, a younger, more hopeful man, a man who believed in love and loyalty and the simple truth of a life well lived. I was so tired. The cold, hard reality of my new life was starting to set in. The truck was too small, the seat was too hard, and the darkness was a cold, suffocating blanket. I was alone now, utterly and completely alone, with no one to turn to, no one to talk to, no one to share my pain with. The silence was deafening, a roar of loneliness that filled every empty space inside me. It was a silence that I knew would follow me, a silence that would cling to me, a silent, unforgiving reminder of what had been and what was no more. The sunrise looked different from the front seat of my truck. It wasn't the warm, golden light I was used to, but a harsh, unforgiving glare that felt like a slap in the face. I was still parked in front of the shop, the world beginning to wake up around me, a world that was moving on without me. I was a man in a truck, a man without a home, a man who had nowhere else to go. The irony of it all was a bitter taste in my mouth. My shop, the one place I had left, was now a refuge, a sanctuary from the cruel, cold reality of the world. I unlocked the door, the bell chiming its sad, lonely song, a song that now felt like a funeral dirge for a life that was lost. I walked inside, the familiar smell of sawdust and fresh paint, a comforting scent, a scent that felt like home. I started to work, my hands finding a rhythm of their own, sorting, cleaning, organizing. It was a mindless task, one that required no thought, no emotion, just a quiet, steady rhythm. It was a way to escape, a way to forget, a way to lose myself in the simple, honest grind of a life I had always known. The morning passed in a blur of small, quiet tasks. A customer came in, an old man named Caldwell, who had been coming to my shop for 30 years. He asked me how I was, and I lied, telling him I was fine, that everything was fine. He looked at me for a long moment, a sad, knowing look in his eyes, as if he knew my life was a lie. "You look tired, Lyle," he said. "Get some rest." His words were a small, gentle comfort, a small piece of humanity in a world that had become so cold and cruel. I thanked him and he left, the bell chiming behind him. I went back to work, my hands a little less steady now, the quiet reality of my life settling back in. It was a lonely existence, a solitary life that I was not prepared for, a life without Genevieve, a life without a home, a life without a future. The thought of it was a heavy, suffocating weight on my chest. I had to do something, anything, to get out of this hole. I had to fight back, to find a way to get my life back. Then the bell chimed again. A woman walked in, dressed in a sleek business suit. I didn't recognize her. She had a briefcase in her hand, a sleek, expensive-looking thing that felt out of place in my dusty, old shop. She looked around, her eyes scanning the shelves, the stacks of tools, the rows of screws and nails. "Are you Lyle?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. "I am," I said, a sense of unease starting to creep up my spine. She smiled, a cold, predatory smile that made me feel like I was a piece of meat on a butcher's block. "My name is Maribel. I represent Oswin Enterprises. My client has been instructed to buy this building. We've been told you're a long-term tenant. We'd like to make you an offer, a very generous offer." The words hit me like a physical blow. The shop. They were trying to buy the shop. Genevieve was trying to take the only thing I had left, the one thing she had told me I could have. The offer was for the building, but I knew it was meant for me. A way to force me out, to force me to sell my business, my life's work. My hands tightened into fists, and my jaw clenched. I looked at her, my eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and fear. "Tell your client," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "that this shop is not for sale." Her smile didn't falter. "I'm sure you'll reconsider," she said, and then she turned and walked out, the bell chiming behind her, a mocking, triumphant sound. The rest of the day was a blur of quiet, simmering rage. I worked with a fury I hadn't felt in years. My hands a blur of motion, a silent testament to my anger. The shop was a sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the simple, honest work of my hands, but now it felt like a battlefield, a place where I was fighting a silent, invisible war. I closed the shop early, the thought of being in that space for another second, another minute, unbearable. I couldn't bear the thought of her, of Genevieve, of her cold, calculating cruelty, of her attempts to take everything I had ever loved. I got in my truck and just drove. The streets of Almeria, a blur of light and color, a world that was moving on without me. I was a ghost, a lost soul, a man without a home, a man without a future. The sun was setting, a fiery orange and purple sky, a beautiful, angry sky that matched the storm inside me. I was tired, so tired of fighting, so tired of being alone. I ended up at a small diner, a place I had never been to before. It was on the outskirts of town, a quiet, lonely place with a handful of cars in the parking lot. I walked in, the smell of coffee and stale fries a comforting scent. I sat at a booth in the back, a little worn down and a little bit disty, and a young woman with a kind face and tired eyes came over to take my order. "What can I get you, sir?" she asked, her voice soft and gentle. "Just a cup of coffee," I said, my voice a little hoarse from disuse. She nodded and walked away, and I just sat there staring out the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. When she came back with the coffee, she didn't say anything, just set the cup down in front of me. And then, a moment later, she came back with a plate of toast, a small pat of butter melting on the top. "On the house," she said, her voice a little softer now. "You look like you've had a bad day." I looked at her, my eyes a little watery. She had no idea how right she was. I just nodded, a small, grateful gesture. I didn't have the words to thank her, didn't have the strength to form the words. She sat down across from me, her own cup of coffee in her hand. "My name is Kala," she said. "I'm a new hire. Came here from the city. I know what it's like to be alone. You want to talk about it?" I looked at her, a complete stranger, a woman with a kind face and tired eyes, and I knew, in that moment, that I could. I told her everything. I told her about Genevieve, about the lottery ticket, about the millions of dollars, about the betrayal, about the eviction, about the shop. I told her everything, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of pain and anger and sorrow. She didn't say anything, just listened, her eyes fixed on mine, her face a mask of empathy and understanding. When I was done, she took a long sip of her coffee and looked at me. "You have to fight back, Lyle," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't let her win. She can't just take everything from you. You have to fight for your life." She told me about a local legal aid clinic, a place that helped people who had been wronged, a place that fought for people who had no one else to fight for them. She gave me the address, wrote it down on a napkin, and slid it across the table. It was a small gesture, a simple piece of paper, but it felt like a lifeline. It felt like a flicker of hope in the dark, a small, fragile flame in the cold, unforgiving night. The legal aid clinic was in a rundown office building downtown, the kind of place you'd pass without a second glance. The sign on the door was faded, the letters chipped and peeling. I walked in, the bell above the door jangling a lonely tune, and was greeted by a woman with a kind smile and a tired face. She told me to take a seat, and I sat down on a worn-out couch, the cushions lumpy and soft. I watched as people came and went, their faces etched with the same kind of weariness I felt. I was not alone. The thought was a small, quiet comfort. A few minutes later, a man with a kind face and a rumpled suit came out and called my name. "Lyle," he said. "I'm Lowell. Come on in." His office was small, crammed with stacks of books and papers. He gestured to a chair, and I sat down, the chair creaking under my weight. He didn't ask me to start, he just listened. I told him everything, the same story I had told Kala, the same story that was now a part of me, a scar I couldn't hide. When I was done, he just sat there for a long moment, his hands folded on the desk, his eyes closed. I waited, the silence in the room, a heavy, suffocating weight. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at me. "She's a clever woman, Lyle," he said, his voice quiet. "She's done everything by the book. It's her word against yours." He laid out the facts, the cold, hard reality of my situation. She had filed for divorce. She had claimed the ticket was hers alone, and the law for now was on her side. Unless, he said, and then he paused, a long, pregnant pause that felt like an eternity. Unless we can prove that the ticket was a joint asset. My heart started to pound. A joint asset. The words were a lifeline, a ray of hope in the dark. But how could I prove it? We had always just used cash, just had a joint account. The money wasn't labeled. It was just our money, shared and earned together. He told me to think back, to remember every detail, every single moment. I did. I thought about the day she bought the ticket, the small, seemingly insignificant detail of a transaction that now held the key to my future. I told him about the day, the time, the place. He wrote it all down, his pen scratching against the paper. "Do you have a bank statement from that day?" he asked. I didn't. I had been kicked out of my home, my belongings gone, my life in a plastic bag. I felt the hope start to die inside me, a small, quiet death. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle. "We can get a copy from the bank. It'll take some time, but we'll get it." He then asked me a question that changed everything. "Do you remember where she got the money to buy the ticket, Lyle?" I thought about it, about the day, the time, the moment. I had been working in the shop, and she had come in, a smile on her face. She had just sold something, I said, a faint memory coming back to me, a faint, distant whisper of a memory. She had an old family heirloom, a gold necklace, one of her grandmother's. She sold it at that antique shop on 4th Street. She told me she was going to use the money to pay for a new coat for Raina. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. "And did she?" Lowell asked, his voice now a little sharper, a little more urgent. I shook my head. No, she hadn't. She had bought the lottery ticket instead. It was a small, quiet lie that now held the key to my future. It was a secret, a quiet, almost imperceptible betrayal that now held the key to my redemption. The bank statement took a week to arrive. Every day felt like an eternity, a slow, agonizing crawl toward a future I wasn't sure I had. I was still living in my truck, still working at the shop, still a ghost in my own life. But now I had a flicker of hope, a small, fragile flame in the cold, unforgiving night. I had Lowell, a man who was fighting for me, a man who believed in me, a man who was fighting for a man who had nothing left to lose. When the letter from the bank finally arrived, my hands were shaking as I opened it. It was a long, complex document, filled with numbers and dates and transactions that didn't make sense. But Lowell found it, the record of the withdrawal from our joint bank account. A small, seemingly insignificant transaction. A withdrawal of $20, the exact price of the lottery ticket. It was a small, seemingly insignificant detail, but it was everything. It was proof. It was the proof I needed, the proof that the money was ours, that the ticket was a joint asset, a shared dream that had been turned into a nightmare. The thought of it was a rush of relief, a flood of emotion that I had been holding back for weeks. Lowell was ecstatic. "This is it, Lyle," he said, his voice a little hoarse from excitement. "This is a win. This proves that the ticket was purchased with joint funds. It means we have a case," he said. "We can file an injunction, a legal motion to stop her from claiming the winnings as her own, to force her to split it with me." It was a small, quiet victory, a small, quiet moment of redemption. But it wasn't the end. He reminded me that the eviction was still in effect, that the restraining order was still in place. It was a battle, not a war. I had to keep fighting. I had to keep pushing forward. I had to find a way to get my life back. The thought of it was a heavy, suffocating weight on my chest. I had to do something, anything, to get out of this hole. I had to fight back, to find a way to get my life back. I called Kala and told her the good news. She was happy for me, her voice filled with a kind of joy that felt foreign and new to me. "I told you you could do it," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "I told you you couldn't give up." Her words were a small, gentle comfort, a small piece of humanity in a world that had become so cold and cruel. I went back to the shop, a little lighter now, a little more hopeful. The bell chimed a happy song, a song of hope and redemption. I walked in, my hands a little more steady, my heart a little less heavy. I was still a man in a truck, a man without a home, but now I had a future. I had a chance. The thought of it was a rush of emotion, a flood of hope that I had been holding back for weeks. But the hope was short-lived. A few minutes later, a black sedan pulled up outside. The car was sleek and expensive, the same one I had seen on my street, the same one that had brought Oswin to my home, to take everything I had ever loved. He got out of the car, a smile on his face, a cold, predatory smile that made me feel like I was a piece of meat on a butcher's block. He had a briefcase in his hand, a sleek, expensive-looking thing that felt out of place in my dusty old shop. He walked in, his presence a dark, suffocating shadow, a silent, mocking presence. "Hello, Lyle," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "My name is Oswin, and I have an offer for you, one that you won't be able to refuse." Oswin walked into my shop as if he owned it, his polished shoes clicking against the worn wooden floor. He didn't even bother to look at the shelves or tools, his eyes fixed on me, a cold, calculating stare that made me feel like an insect under a magnifying glass. He set his briefcase on the counter, the leather sleek and new, and unclipped it, the sound a sharp, unforgiving click in the quiet of the shop. He pulled out a piece of paper, a document with a logo I didn't recognize, and laid it out on the counter. "My client, Genevieve, has authorized me to make you an offer, Lyle," he said, his voice a low, silky purr. "A very generous offer, for this shop." I looked at the document, the numbers on it a sickening, insulting joke. It was a fraction of what the building was worth, a low-ball offer meant to offend, to mock. My hands tightened into fists, and my jaw clenched. I looked at him, my eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and fear. "I told your representative," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "that this shop is not for sale." He smiled, a cold, humorless smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you'll reconsider," he said, his voice still that low, silky purr. "You see, my client is now a very wealthy woman. She has the means to make your life very difficult. We can drag this out in court for years. We can bury you in legal fees. We can buy the building and then we can evict you. We can make sure you never work again." The words were a threat, a cold, brutal declaration of war. He was not just trying to buy my shop. He was trying to take my life, my dignity, my future. He was trying to break me. He was trying to take the only thing I had left, the one thing she had told me I could have. The thought of it was a cold, suffocating weight on my chest. I looked at him, my eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and fear. "I don't care," I said, my voice trembling now. "I won't sell." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're a fool, Lyle," he said, his voice a little harder now, a little less silky. "You're a sentimental fool. This is just a building. It's just a shop. It's not worth fighting for." But he was wrong. He was so wrong. This shop was not just a building. It was my life. It was a monument to a life well lived, a life of hard work, a life of honest toil. It was the only thing I had left, the one thing she hadn't managed to take from me. I was not going to give it up. I was not going to let him or her win. I was going to fight. I was going to fight with every last ounce of strength I had. I was going to fight for my dignity, for my life, for my future. I was going to fight for the one thing I had left to fight for. The thought of it was a rush of emotion, a flood of hope that I had been holding back for weeks. But the hope was short-lived. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out another document, a smaller, more official-looking one. "Then let's make this interesting," he said, his voice now a cold, menacing hiss. "Genevieve has filed a complaint against you with the city zoning board. Your sign is a few inches too large. Your awning is in violation of a new city ordinance. The inspector will be here tomorrow. You'll be facing a fine and a court order to fix everything. And if you don't, we'll have a new reason to evict you. She's not just trying to buy your shop, Lyle. She's trying to ruin you. This is just the beginning." He smiled again, a cold, predatory smile that made my blood run cold. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was playing a long, cruel game, and I was the unsuspecting pawn. The next day, the inspector came, just as Oswin had promised. He was a small, quiet man with a clipboard and a sad, knowing look in his eyes. He walked around the shop, his eyes a little too professional, a little too cold, and he wrote down a list of violations. The sign, the awning, the new ramp I had built for an old woman in a wheelchair, the flower pots I kept on the sidewalk. Everything was a violation. He didn't say anything, just wrote it all down, his pen scratching against the paper, a quiet, methodical rhythm that was the soundtrack to my ruin. When he was done, he just looked at me, a sad, sympathetic look in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lyle," he said, his voice a quiet whisper. "I don't make the rules. I just enforce them." And then he was gone, the quiet of the shop a heavy, suffocating weight. I was defeated. She was winning. She was using her money, her power, her cruelty to crush me, to destroy everything I had ever loved. The thought of it was a bitter, stinging slap to the face. The world was a cold, cruel place. A place where money was power. A place where people like her could take everything from people like me. I went back to the front counter and stared out the window. the world a blur of light and color, a world that was moving on without me. I was a ghost, a lost soul, a man without a future. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a small, quiet sound in the silence of the shop. I pulled it out, my hands a little shaky now, and saw a text from an unknown number. "It's Raina," the text read. "Don't tell Mom. I need to talk to you. Meet me at the diner on Elm Street in an hour." My heart leaped into my throat. Raina, my daughter, the one person I thought was lost to me forever. She had reached out. She had broken the silence. The thought of it was a rush of emotion, a flood of hope that I had been holding back for weeks. I texted back, "I'll be there," and then I put my phone in my pocket and walked out of the shop. I didn't care about the inspector, about the fines, about the violations. I didn't care about the shop. I only cared about one thing. I only cared about my daughter. I walked down the street, my hands a little less shaky now, my heart a little less heavy. I had a reason to fight. I had a reason to live. I had a reason to hope. I got to the diner, the same one where Kala had given me the napkin with the address, and I sat in a booth in the back, my heart pounding in my chest. I ordered a cup of coffee and waited, watching the door, watching the street. A few minutes later, she walked in. She looked different. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and her shoulders were slumped. She looked like a woman who had been through a lot, a woman who had been through too much. She sat down across from me, her eyes fixed on mine, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice a quiet whisper. "What happened?" I told her everything. I told her about the lottery ticket, about the millions of dollars, about the betrayal, about the divorce, about the eviction. I told her about the shop, about Oswin, about the zoning inspector. I told her everything, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of pain and anger and sorrow. She didn't say anything, just listened, her eyes fixed on mine, her face a mask of empathy and understanding. When I was done, she took a long sip of her coffee and looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "She told me you left, Dad," she said, her voice a low, broken whisper. "She told me you walked out on her. She told me you abandoned us." My heart shattered into a million pieces. A lie. It was a bold, brazen lie. My daughter, my own flesh and blood. She had lied to her. She had manipulated her, had turned her against me. The thought of it was a crushing blow, a pain so deep and so raw it felt like a physical wound. The confession from my daughter felt like a physical punch to the gut. It was a blow so unexpected, so brutal that it left me breathless. She had lied. Genevieve had not just betrayed me. She had poisoned the one relationship that mattered most in my life. The lie was a calculated act of cruelty, meant to turn my own child against me, to make me utterly alone. The thought of it was a cold, suffocating weight on my chest, a new, deeper layer of betrayal. I looked at Raina, her face a mixture of sorrow and confusion, her eyes pleading for an explanation. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain the depths of that kind of malice? How do you explain that the woman who gave her life would lie to her, would use her as a pawn in her cruel, greedy game? "I didn't, Raina," I said, my voice a broken whisper. "I would never have left you. I would never have left your mother. I would never have abandoned you." She nodded, tears now streaming down her face. She knew. She had always known, deep down, that her mother's story was a lie. The doubt had been a small, quiet seed in her mind, a seed that had now blossomed into a full-blown realization. A full-blown realization that her mother was capable of a cruelty she couldn't have imagined. The next hour was a blur of revelations. Raina told me about her life, about the things her mother had told her, about the new car, about the new apartment, about the new life she was living, a life that was so different from the one we had known. "She has a new boyfriend, Dad," she said, her voice low and broken. "His name is Oswin. He's a lawyer. He's the one who's been helping her with everything." The name hit me like a ton of bricks. Oswin, the cold, calculating man who had walked into my shop, who had threatened me, who was now my ex-wife's new boyfriend. The thought of it was a bitter, stinging slap to the face. It wasn't just about money. It was about her new life. A life she had planned and plotted. A life she had built with a new man. A new life she had built on the ruins of mine. The knowledge was a new, deeper level of pain. A new, deeper level of betrayal. She had not just taken my money. She had taken my home, my wife, and now she was trying to take my daughter. I was a man without a life, a man without a family, a man who had lost everything. The thought of it was a heavy, suffocating weight on my chest. I had to do something, anything, to get out of this hole. I had to fight back. I had to fight for my daughter. I had to fight to expose the truth. I told Raina everything. I told her about the bank statement, about the withdrawal, about the proof that the lottery ticket was a joint asset, a shared dream that had been turned into a nightmare. I told her about the legal aid clinic, about Lowell, about the injunction he was filing. She listened, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "He's a good lawyer, Dad," she said, her voice filled with a new kind of strength, a new kind of hope. "You can't give up. You have to fight back. You have to expose the truth." Her words were a new kind of a lifeline, a new kind of a reason to fight. I had my daughter back. The thought of it was a rush of emotion, a flood of hope that I had been holding back for weeks. But the hope was short-lived. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, her face a mask of fear. "It's Mom," she said, her voice a low, broken whisper. "She wants to meet. She said she has something to tell me. Something important." I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. What was she up to? What new lie was she going to tell? What new manipulation was she going to try? I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The courtroom was a cold, unforgiving place. The air was thick with the silent, unspoken tension of 1,000 broken lives, 1,000 broken dreams. I sat in a hard wooden chair, my hands clasped together, my heart pounding in my chest. Across the room, Genevieve sat with Oswin, her face a perfect mask of calm composure. She looked like a woman who had a secret, a woman who knew something I didn't, a woman who was in control. But I knew better. I knew she was a master of lies, a virtuoso of cruelty. And I knew that she had lied to my daughter. That knowledge was a quiet, seething fire inside me, a fire that was growing stronger with every passing moment. I wasn't just fighting for my money. I wasn't just fighting for my shop. I was fighting for my daughter. I was fighting to expose the truth, to show her and the world the kind of woman her mother really was. The thought of it was a new kind of strength, a new kind of resolve that I hadn't felt in weeks. Lowell was a different man in the courtroom. He was no longer the quiet, gentle man who had listened to my story. He was a force of nature, a quiet, methodical lawyer who was a master of his craft. He laid out the facts, the cold, hard reality of my case. He talked about the joint bank account, about the withdrawal, about the proof that the lottery ticket was a joint asset, a shared dream that had been turned into a nightmare. He presented the bank statements, the receipt from the lottery ticket. He talked about the history of our marriage, about the life we had built together, about the shop. He painted a picture of a man who had been wronged, a man who had been betrayed, a man who had lost everything. He didn't speak with emotion. He didn't have to. The facts spoke for themselves. Genevieve and Oswin just sat there, their faces a mask of calm composure. They didn't say anything, didn't object, didn't even try to counter his arguments. They just sat there, a cold, silent presence in the room, their silence a testament to their guilt. Lowell then called Raina to the stand. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't want my daughter to be a part of this, but I knew she had to. She walked to the stand, her face a mask of fear, and she swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Lowell asked her about her mother, about me, about the lies she had been told. She didn't hesitate. She told the truth. She told the court that her mother had lied to her, had told her I had abandoned them, had told her I had walked out on her. She told the court about the new man, about Oswin, about the lies she had been told. Her voice was quiet, but it was firm, a testament to her strength, a testament to her resolve. She was a different woman now, a woman who had been through a lot, a woman who had been through too much. She was a woman who was fighting for the truth, a woman who was fighting for her father. The thought of it was a rush of emotion, a flood of love that I had been holding back for weeks. She was my daughter. The one person who had been lost to me was now back in my life, fighting by my side. The thought of it was a new kind of a strength, a new kind of a resolve. When she was done, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a love and a strength that I hadn't seen in years. I knew then that I had won. I had my daughter back, and that was all that mattered. But then Oswin stood up, a smirk on his face. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a low, silky purr, "the defense has a witness to call, one that will change everything." The witness was a man I didn't recognize, a man in a rumpled suit with a tired face and a kind smile. He looked like an ordinary man, a man you'd see at a diner, a man you'd see at a gas station. But he wasn't. He was a man who held the key to my future, a man who held the key to the truth. He walked to the stand, his face a mask of calm composure, and he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Oswin began to question him, his voice still that low, silky purr. Did you or did you not buy a lottery ticket on the evening of February 14th from a gas station on Main Street? The man nodded. I did, he said, his voice quiet but firm. And did you or did you not win $78 million on that ticket? The man nodded again. I did, he said, his voice a little shaky now. My heart sank. What was going on? This wasn't making any sense. This man was not Genevieve. This man was the winner. What was going on? Oswin continued to question him. Did you or did you not lose that ticket on the same evening? The man nodded again, tears now streaming down his face. I did, he said, his voice a low, broken whisper. I lost it. I put it in my coat pocket, and it must have fallen out. Oswin then turned to Genevieve. And did you or did you not find that ticket? Genevieve nodded, a small, triumphant smile on her face. I did, she said, her voice a little hoarse now. I was walking down the street, and I saw it. It was on the ground, a little piece of paper, and I picked it up. Oswin then turned to the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice a low, dramatic purr. My client, Genevieve, found a lost lottery ticket. She did not purchase it. She did not win it. She simply found it. The true winner, the man who is now on the stand, has a right to his winnings. Genevieve has no claim to the money. She found it, but she did not win it. This entire case, Your Honor, is about a lie. My client, Genevieve, was a victim of a lie. She was not the winner. The true winner, the man on the stand. The words were a crushing blow, a bitter, stinging slap to the face. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about something else entirely. Genevieve had never had the millions. She had never had the fortune. She had never had the power. It was all a lie. The man on the stand then spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Your Honor, he said, I am the true winner, but I am an old man. I am sick. I don't want the money. I want to give it to her. I want to give it to Genevieve. She found it. She deserves it. The words were a shocking, unexpected twist, a bitter, cruel irony. He wanted to give it to her. He wanted to give the millions to the woman who had taken everything from me, who had lied to my daughter, who had tried to ruin my life. But the judge was a man of the law. The money belongs to you, sir, he said, his voice firm. The law is clear. It is your property. You can't just give it away. Not like this. Not in court. Not under these circumstances. Oswin's face for the first time was a mask of panic. He had lost control of the narrative. The man on the stand had just ruined his entire case. The judge then turned to me. Lyle, he said, his voice a little softer now. The court has reviewed the evidence, the bank statements, the receipt, the testimony from your daughter. It is clear that the ticket was purchased with joint funds. You are entitled to a share of the winnings. The court will order the true winner to pay you half of the winnings, and the rest will be placed in a trust for him. I was stunned. I had won. I had won half of the winnings. Half of $78 million. It was more money than I could ever have imagined. More money than I had ever dreamed of. It was a new life, a new beginning, a new chance. But the win was a bitter one. I had won, but I had lost everything. I had won, but my life was in ruins. I had won, but I was still a man without a home, a man without a wife, a man who had lost everything. The front door of my shop opened with a familiar chime, a sound that no longer felt sad or lonely, but instead held a new kind of promise. I looked up from the counter, where I was polishing a row of old hammers, and saw her standing there, Genevieve. She was a different woman now. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and her shoulders were slumped. She was dressed in the same clothes I had seen her in for the last few weeks, the expensive clothes she had bought with a lie. But now they looked wrong on her. They looked like a costume she had worn for a role she had failed at. She wasn't the triumphant victor now. She was a defeated woman, a woman who had lost everything. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and sorrow. She didn't say a word, just stood there, her hands clasped together, her face a mask of silent pleading. I waited, the silence in the room a heavy, suffocating weight. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired, so tired. I lost, she said, her voice a low, broken whisper. I lost everything. She told me the truth, the whole, ugly, beautiful truth. She had found the ticket. She had lied to me, to Raina, to the world. She had planned to take the money and start a new life with Oswin. But Oswin was a greedy, cruel man. He had planned to take the money for himself, to abandon her, to leave her with nothing. He had told her that the true winner was dead, that he had no one to give the money to. He had promised her a cut, a small, insignificant piece of a fortune that was never hers to begin with. He had manipulated her, had used her, had turned her into a pawn in his cruel, greedy game. But the true winner, the man on the stand, had come forward. He had exposed Oswin's lie. The money was now his, and I was entitled to half of it. Oswin had taken the rest and had run. He had left her with nothing. She was broke, she was alone, and she was facing legal trouble. The police had already called. They were investigating her for fraud, for theft, for her lies. She had nothing left. She had nowhere else to go. She was at the end of her rope, at the end of her life. She was begging me, not for my shop, not for my money, but for something else entirely. She was begging for my help. "I'm sorry, Lyle," she said, tears now streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I lost everything. I lost you. I lost Raina. I lost my life. Please, Lyle. Please help me." She reached out a hand, her hand now a little less manicured, a little more worn, and she touched my arm. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, my eyes fixed on hers. My life was in ruins. I was a man without a home, a man who had been betrayed, a man who had been abandoned. But I had my daughter back. I had my dignity back. I had my shop back. And now I had a fortune that was more money than I could ever imagine, a fortune that was a testament to my strength, to my resolve, to my victory. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for 30 years, the woman who had torn my life apart, and I knew that I was a different man now. I was no longer the man who had been broken. I was a man who had been reborn. The choice was mine. I could help her, or I could let her fall. But I knew, in that moment, that it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. It was about my new life, my new beginning, my new future. The choice was mine. I could walk away, or I could stay. The choice was mine, and mine alone.